What's good? It's Woog. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. We have Ilunga Jr. Makabu, 28 wins and 2 losses, defending his WBC Cruiserweight title against Thabiso Mchunu, 23 wins and 5 losses. Now, before you say, wait, who? Just know that you're not alone. Like, the cruiserweight division pretty much makes the smallest footprint in popular boxing, especially here in the States. Like, it gets little to no coverage. The only reason anybody knew recently were aware of what was taking place in the cruiserweight division was because we had somebody in Alexander Usyk who unified all 4 titles before then going to heavyweight. Evander Holyfield had a great cruiserweight career before his legendary heavyweight career. It's pretty much known as, like, a pit stop between light heavyweight and heavyweight. So you usually have bigger names in both light heavyweight and in heavyweight than you have at cruiserweight. It just doesn't get a lot of coverage. It's very international. I mean, fighters from all over the world are competing in the division. It just really doesn't get a lot of publicity. Aside from like the super small weight classes, like flyweight, like we're talking 18 pounds, 112 pounds and below, there probably isn't a division that is less covered than the cruiserweight division. So Ilunga Makabu, if you've heard of him or feel like you've heard of him, it's probably because his name has been popping up as a potential future opponent or even maybe next opponent. I don't think so, but his name was floated as a possible opponent for Canelo Alvarez because Canelo's trainer, Eddie Reynoso, went to basically a WBC meeting and petitioned that his fighter, Canelo Alvarez, can challenge several divisions up for the WBC Cruiserweight title. And that title holder is Ilunga Jr. Makabu. So this Makabu versus Mchunu fight, this is actually a rematch. They fought back in 2015. Now, Makabu, as I said, is the WBC Cruiserweight champion. This will be his second title defense. And when he and Mchunu first fought in 2015 in South Africa, that's Mchunu's hometown. He's South African. Makabu is from the Congo. This was kind of seen as like a crossroads fight because Ilunga Makabu had a really good record and was winning, almost all of his fights except for like the very first fight in his career. And Mchunu, had retained like a regional cruiserweight title. It was like one of those WBC NABF regional titles. So Mchunu, who's listed at only an inch shorter than Makabu, but looked several inches shorter because of the way that he fights. He kind of has like that almost Floyd Mayweather-like shoulder roll, and he kind of has like a wide stance. So he's listed at 5'11", Makabu 6 feet, but Makabu was looking like 6'2", 6'3" to Mchunu's. They basically looked like they were like 4 inches apart because of how wide Mchunu's stance was. But he was actually picking Makabu apart in the first few rounds to where like he won basically the first 4 rounds where the broadcasters are saying Makabu's got to, really turn things around and swing things into his favor because he's getting beaten badly on the scorecards. Makabu even got wobbled like in the 3rd or 4th and kind of like stumbled backwards towards the ropes. Mchunu was just looking like a super sharp puncher. This was interesting because this is southpaw versus southpaw. And how many rematches can you think of? Because we're about to get into the rematch between these two, where it's a southpaw versus southpaw fighting each other twice. Very interesting. But this was southpaw versus southpaw. In Mchunu, the first thing that you realize is that the best punch between the two might be his jab. Like, he's got an excellent jab. In fact, a couple fights later, he fights Alexander Usyk, believe it or not, and he wins the first 2 rounds against Usyk. Yes, Usyk is a slow starter. Ilunga Makabu is also a very slow starter in several of his key fights. But Mchunu gets off to like early leads. Like, he's got a very snappy jab, a very quick like counter left uppercut, straight left, and so he varies the punches up. Good hand speed. Makabu has good hand speed as well. But you had basically a towering 6'3" Usyk when he was fighting Mchunu, and Usyk had to take a couple rounds to figure out what the hell was coming at him because he was getting hit flush with the jabs. And yes, Usyk figured it out, ended up knocking Mchunu out in the 9th round. But yeah, Mchunu, for as slow a starter as Makabu is, and as Usyk was in that fight versus Mchunu, Mchunu is a very fast starter. So he gets off to an early lead against Makabu, but Makabu's style is that he kind of keeps like a poker face. He'll even kind of be between a poker face and a very like tough, demonstrative face where, you know, between kind of, you know, mean mugging you and just kind of wearing you out mentally, because he takes a very good punch upstairs and to the body, and he's basically pawing with his right jab, because remember, he's a southpaw. So he paws and he'll pop his like right jab out, but he's looking to unleash a very good and varied left hand. Like he could throw this thing straight and he could loop the punch. And he's really just looking to set those up. He'll also throw like an uppercut. He'll whack to the body too. And he'll throw a nice, you know, right hook, kind of a quick right hook. Again, for as lumbering as Makabu looks at times, he actually has pretty good hand speed and just a ton of durability. Like, yes, in his very next fight after this Mchunu fight, he gets knocked out by Tony Bellew after dropping Bellew in the first round, to where Bellew does a backward somersault. Bellew ends up catching him badly in the 3rd round with a left hook and ends up finishing him. Kind of hurt him a little bit in the previous round, but finished Makabu in the 3rd round. It was a sensational fight because this one took place in Liverpool, England. So it was a super pro Bellew crowd. It was for the then vacant WBC Cruiserweight title, the same one that Makabu would win several years later. But this was like a high stakes fight, and that's actually how Bellew wins the Cruiserweight belt in 2016. But yeah, Bellew knocks him out in the 3rd round. But in this Makabu versus Mchunu fight just before that, Makabu loses the first few rounds, rallies back, and ends up stopping Mchunu in the 11th round. This was in South Africa, and you know, crowds abroad are just different. Like if you look at Makabu's fight several years later, it was one of his most recent fights. It was actually the one where he wins the vacant Cruiserweight WBC belt against Michael Cieslak out of Poland. Makabu fights Cieslak in his hometown, in Makabu's hometown of the Congo. And you just see how the crowd is celebrating the fight while the fight's taking place. It's pretty unbelievable. But in this Makabu versus Mchunu fight, high stakes, Makabu pulls out a super dramatic rally, come from behind, stoppage win over Mchunu. Very good fight. In fact, Makabu's been in several good fights, like real barn burners. Like again, that one, his very next fight against Bellew, ended early. It ended in the 3rd round. But during that 3 rounds of action, super interesting. Makabu is a very interesting fighter. And again, he looks like he's lumbering because if I could find a flaw in his game, his feet are a little bit slow. They were faster back in 2015, 2016. But now he's kind of like a step forward, step back. He knows how to control range pretty well, and he keeps his shoulders pretty high, keeps his chin low, but his stance isn't as wide as like Mchunu's. He looks a little taller, has a decent sized reach, a lot longer than Mchunu's reach. But he's a smart fighter. Like when he's getting punched, he's not getting punched super cleanly. You see him just kind of do like little veteran rolls and things to where, I mean, he'll get hit flush sometimes, but he's more often than not kind of rolling with it. Again, high shoulders, and he just seems to have a good sense of his opponent's punch pattern. Like if you double up on one hand, you might get a good one on him. But usually people tend to alternate hands, which is a much more predictable pattern. And Makabu more or less has that, you know, figured out. And he's always putting that intelligent pressure on, looking for those opportunities where he's probing with the right to unleash the left. It's a lot of mental pressure on the opponent. So after beating Mchunu and then getting knocked out by Tony Bellew in 2016, he then wins his next 6 fights, taking place all over the place. The Congo, France, Zimbabwe, another fight in South Africa, Germany, Russia. He's traveling all over the place. Wins his next 6 fights, 5 of which came via knockout. And then he fights Alexei Papin, a former kickboxer out of Russia. And this is basically for one of the silver WBC belts, but it's also to kind of get in line for the actual WBC Cruiserweight title. So This Makabu versus Papin fight takes place in Russia. So Makabu's a bit of a road warrior. He's fighting Papin in Papin's hometown of Russia. Super highly intense fight. This is actually on the Sergey Kovalev versus Anthony Yarde undercard in Russia. So people are more so waiting for the main event to come on. But yeah, they were treated to a very good Makabu versus Papin fight. And Papin, his footwork is still a little bit that of a kickboxer. He's won a couple fights since this fight against Makabu, but he kind of does like a thing where he raises his knee a little bit before stepping in and out sometimes. But Makabu ends up winning a majority decision versus Papin. He dropped him in this fight. And, you know, by the end of this fight, Makabu got hurt very badly against Papin, where he was like, you know, wobbled around the ring. It was an excellent fight. I actually thought Makabu should have won by a couple rounds. One of the judges actually called this a draw. So it was a majority decision win for Makabu on the road against Papin. And then his very next fight is against Mikhail Sislak for the vacant WBC belt. This takes place in January 2020. So this is just before the COVID pandemic shutdowns. And Makabu beats Sislak via unanimous decision. Dropped him in the fight too. Again, Makabu's got some punching power. Some of his fights might go the distance, but yeah, more often than not, he's getting his opponent out of there. Again, he varies his style of delivery on that left hand, and he's got tons of pop on it, and he changes speed on it too. Sometimes it looks like he's kind of like throwing it almost half-heartedly, and then sometimes he whips it where he puts his head down and then throws it in a way where it looks like he's trying to close the show. So he fights Sislak, beats him via unanimous decision. This is the one that takes place in the Congo. So this is like a homecoming for Makabu. The crowd is just celebrating their fighter winning the Cruiserweight title. Again, this is the second time he challenged for the belt. So it's been a long time coming. And it was over 4 years since he had first challenged for the belt. So yeah, it was a long road back. He had to win like 8-9 fights to get there. But his one title defense after winning that belt was also a knockout win, TKO in the 7th round. So that is the last time Makabu's taken to the ring. This was in December 2020. So it was his one late 2020 COVID era fight. Didn't fight once in 2021. So this fight against Mchunu, this rematch versus Mchunu is taking place. He's been out of the ring for basically just over a year, whereas Mchunu had his last fight in March. So Mchunu's actually riding a 4-fight win streak himself. He's had 2 more losses since that loss to Usyk. So he had a loss early in his career, and then he loses to Makabu in that very pivotal 2015 fight, and then he fights Usyk 2 fights later, challenging for a title. It's kind of crazy that, well, I guess, you know, Makabu had fought Bellew for the title. Mchunu fought Usyk around the same time, also 2016, but it was for only the WBO Cruiserweight title. So this is basically Usyk this is Usyk between his fight against Krzysztof Glowacki, becoming the first to beat Glowacki, and then the Michael Hunter fight. So between the Glowacki fight and the Michael Hunter fight for Usyk, that's when he beat Mchunu via, again, 9th round knockout after dropping, I'd say, the first couple rounds. Usyk, by the way, also probably lost a few of the early rounds against Michael Hunter before beating him. So, you know, this is before Usyk joins the World Boxing Super Series, where he would beat Maris Briedis, Marco Huck just before that, and then Murat Gassiev to basically win that Ali trophy and to capture all 4 belts before then fighting Bellew and then going up to heavyweight. But after losing to Usyk for Mchunu loses 2 more fights out of his next 4 fights and then goes on a 4-fight winning streak. So what do I expect out of this Makabu versus Mchunu rematch? Well, look, I'm going to assume here that Makabu is still approaching this like an all-in professional. I mean, he is the champion right now. This is his 2nd title defense. It's against a guy he's already beaten. So one, he can't underestimate Mchunu, even though I think that even though he's just a shade older than Mchunu, I feel like his style is going to age better than Mchunu's, because Mchunu relies on a lot of like snappy athleticism. He's usually the shorter fighter, so he's got to do things to make up for the lack of reach against his opponent. When he fought Usyk, by the way, Usyk looked like a giant against Mchunu. Go rewatch that fight. It's amazing that they were even in the same weight division. But Mchunu relies on, again, his very snappy jab, right jab. Again, remember, southpaw versus southpaw. A lot of left-hand uppercuts and left-handed counters. But one thing about Mchunu is that I see him fade in several fights where he'll, again, start off very hot, but somewhere in the middle rounds, the volume starts to decrease, and a fighter like Makabu is able to start just walking him down. And that's exactly what he did in the first fight. That's how Makabu rallied back against Mchunu. He started finding his opportunities. And it's weird. Makabu will he'll throw punches. Like, he's got a lot of volume for a guy who's kind of like heavy set. He's got very good volume, and he's got good endurance. Like, you watch him in the 4th and 5th, and you're looking at this guy like, this guy's gonna gas by the end of this fight, right? But Makabu usually is finishing his fights strong. Yes, he was in all kinds of dire straits late in that fight against Papin. He got hurt late, but usually he's the one who's finishing strong. Makabu is. So Makabu will he'll just throw a straight left to the body. It doesn't look hard, but he's tapping him, and he's tapping him between his opponent's punches. So his opponent will try to be getting his combinations off, and Makabu has no problem punching with you. Some guys will wait for the storm to pass and then come forward. Makabu will let 1 or 2 go and then try to throw to thread the needle in between those punches. And those punches can often hurt the opponent because they don't see those ones coming. They think that they are going to get their things off first, and then that their opponent's going to reply. But when you're able to throw the needle and kind of hit them between punches, you catch them cleanly, you catch them coming into the punch, you catch their head coming forward into the punch, which increases the impact often. So Makabu's a very smart and crafty fighter. In this rematch, I don't think that it's going to go better for Mchunu. I think that he's got a chance at stopping him in the first half of the fight, but I think that it's unlikely. And given these fighters' history, which, by the way, there was one moment where they traded low blows. It was crazy. Mchunu hit Makabu low. The ref, kind of breaks it up and says, don't do that. Walks Makabu back. You okay? You okay? You ready to go? Makabu's like, yeah. First thing Makabu does is load up on a sweeping, I think it was it a left? I forgot whether it was a left or a right, but a sweeping punch right to the groin area. And then the ref didn't take a point away, but he's like, what the hell are you doing? And Makabu just kind of had Makabu's demeanor in the ring is very interesting. Sometimes he'll showboat, sometimes he'll put his hands out like Usyk does sometimes and just kind of look to the crowd or give a disdainful, condescending look to his opponent. Kind of a character in the ring. I've seen him, I think it was in the first Mchunu fight, where he's they're in a clinch, Makabu's back is against the ropes, and he's kind of doing, the international, kiss where you're kissing both cheeks, but he was doing that 3 times on each side. It was funny guy, but he's all, I was going to say he's all business in the ring. He's 95% business in the ring. He does have a sense of humor in there, but don't mistake that for a lack of focus, because he's usually making the right decisions in the ring. I don't think that he's going to lose his title to Mchunu here. I actually think that he's going to stop him late again. Maybe even, he stopped him in the 11th round in the first fight. I'll say probably 8th, 9th, maybe 10th round in this rematch. This is probably going to be Mchunu's last shot at a title. He had the title shot against Usyk, and he's had a long road back. And Mchunu has, since his, title challenge loss, he's won, lost a couple, won way more than he's lost, and now he's holding one of those silver cruiserweight titles. So he's got to know that it's now or never for him. I just don't think that this fight style, this clash of styles between him and Makabu is favorable to him being, again, the shorter, more athletic, reliant fighter, because both of these guys are 5 years older or 6 years older than they were the first time they fought. I just think that Makabu is closer to, You know, Makabu arguably is a better fighter today than he was 5-6 years ago. I don't think that the same is true for Mchunu. Yes, he is on a 4-fight winning streak, but he beat like a old Denis Lebedev. He split. They lost the first one via majority decision, won the second via unanimous decision against Thomas Ufthausen. So it's not like he's been fighting the cream of the crop. Whereas if you look at like the ring rankings and, you know, who is highly touted at Cruiserweight, you know, those early fights aside against, you know, Bellew, where Makabu lost to Bellew and then beating Mchunu, you know, he's beaten Cieslak, Papin, who are both ranked in the top 10, according to Ring, in the Cruiserweight division. And he's beaten Mchunu, who's currently ranked like number 4 after the champion. So it goes champ, and then they start at 1, 2, 3, 4. Some of them, they'll have like the champ like vacant. That's if they're not holding a Ring title. But yeah, the Ring champion in this division is Mairis Briedis. He is kind of seen as the best Cruiserweight in the world right now. Yes, Mchunu is a belt holder, but Mairis Briedis' his only loss to this day is against Usyk. He has beaten Dorticos, who is the Ring magazine number 2 guy behind Briedis. And Briedis is like calling out Jake Paul these days. He's trying to get a payday. He's like in his mid 30s now. I don't see him pivoting to heavyweight in the same way that Usyk did. I don't think that he's big enough. I think he's a little bit older. I just don't see that happening for Briedis. Briedis deserves to cash out. He's been an elite fighter for some time, so I get him wanting the money. It just looks a little bit thirsty. Not the best look for somebody as credentialed and credible as Mairis Briedis. But yeah, Makabu has beaten Mchunu, who's like the number 4 ranked Ring challenger, and then Papin and Cieslak are both top 10s as well. So he's been fighting some of the better cruiserweights. No, he hasn't fought Lawrence Okoli either, who's the newly crowned WBO belt holder. So yeah, there's basically, you know, a few really good cruiserweights who we want to see fight each other. I'd love to see Briedis versus the winner of this Makabu versus Mchunu fight. If Canelo wants to fight Makabu, great. That'll be interesting. We could get into that one later. I think that that's actually a more interesting matchup than it appears on its face. But in this Makabu versus Mchunu rematch, I'm going with Makabu via late stoppage again. I think history repeats itself this time because of the matchups. But yeah, let me know what you think in the comments. Do you want to see Makabu earn the Canelo sweepstakes and get the fight with Canelo, or do you want to see Canelo fight somebody else? I mean, again, I think that it would be interesting, but I think that it would be more interesting if Canelo were to fight. They've been talking maybe Jermall Charlo. I think that'd be fantastic. Of course, David Benavidez would be cool, or challenging any of the studs at 175. Beterbiev, Bivol, Joe Smith, you know the guys. But yeah, let me know what you think in the comments. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you were into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.